everyone, and welcome to today's Your Author program. My name is Patty Valdovinos, librarian in Multilingual Collections Department, and I'm here today with Lear Heller, young adult librarian from the Teenscape Department of the Los Angeles Public Library.
Thank you. It is our pleasure to host the Your Author series today. Please feel free to use the chat box to communicate your thoughts, comments, and questions throughout the program. We'll be answering your questions at the end of the program. Also, don't forget to email ECDEPT down there at lapl.org to be entered into an opportunity drawing to win a copy of today's book, Flood City by Daniel José Older.
Yeah. In today's Your Author program, author, editor, and composer Daniel José Older discusses his new book, Flood City, which we have right here. Daniel's work has been recognized by Esquire and Time magazine, and he's won the International Latino Book Award, the World Fantasy Award, and the Mythopoeic Award, among others. He is the lead story architect for Star Wars: The High Republic and had a decade-long career as a paramedic in New York City.
We want to thank our generous donors, the Lenore S and Bernard A. Greenberg Fund and the Library Foundation for helping the library bring these amazing author and illustrator programs. And now for what we're all waiting for. Welcome, Daniel.
Yay!
Hey!
We need like bullhorns or like weird sounds just to like introduce.
That intro music was really like wild. I wasn't expecting it. It's very,
right?
It's peppy. Yeah.
It hypes us up. It's our hype song.
It's very hype. I know. I was here dancing.
I know. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Daniel. We are very excited. Me and Lear have been talking about this for about a few weeks, months. I don't know. What is time, right? So it's wonderful to have you here, right? I don't even know. It's almost 2022. I keep saying 2022. All right. So we're here today to get to know more about you, your creative process, and your work with Flood City, as well as other works you've done. So before we get started with our questions, can you start us off by sharing your favorite quote from Flood City?
Yeah. So many books, and they're backwards in the picture. So yes, I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning, right from the beginning, because quite frankly, it starts out with a bang. So Flood City, Chapter 1. Max Salazar and his older sister Yala burst out of their 20th floor apartment and sped into the still gray sky over Flood City. Side by side, they plummeted toward the jagged ground. The wind screamed against their ears, sent Yala's locks flying out behind her, and made Max's stomach turn somersaults. The broken buildings around them sped past faster and faster until everything blurred into one soggy gray-brown smudge. Then, finally, Yala yelled, "Now!" and zipped out of sight with an explosion of fire and smoke. Max pushed both his heels down inside his jet boots, waiting for that heart-stopping jolt as the rocket engines propelled him skyward. Nothing happened. Uh-oh. The ground flew up toward Max like an angry monster. He pushed his heels down again and felt the ignition pedals drop uselessly against the boot soles. "Max!" Yala yelled from far up above. Max could already make out the mountains of scrap metal between the crumbling buildings. A peaceful stream wandered amidst the detritus beneath him. He dug his heels in again, this time getting a shallow sputtering. It was better than nothing. If he could get ignited, he still might be able to. Vroom! The jet boots exploded to life. Max jolted forward, bounced off a tire mountain, and zipped just inches over a pile of razor-sharp metal shards before speeding back, up past Yala's bemused face and higher than their apartment building, straight into the early morning sky and way above Flood City, which glimmered and shone below.
Yay.
That was awesome. Thank you. Everyone enter that opportunity drawing. It's such a great book. So first question, what sparked the idea for Flood City and what was the publishing process like?
Man, it was a publishing process like no other I've ever had. And that actually says a lot because I have, not to brag, but I have like 15 books out because I love writing. Like really, I never set out to be like, I'm going to write so many books. I was always just like, I want to be a writer. I love writing. So I started writing books. And when they started getting published, I was like, oh, I guess I'll keep going. But here's the interesting thing about Flood City. I started and finished writing Flood City 11 years ago. And that's how weird publishing is. It was the third book I wrote, and I was kind of just on a tear. Like, this was before anyone knew who I was. I hadn't published anything. I wrote Shadowshaper, and then I wrote, which is behind me somewhere.
I know, it flips.
So I wrote Shadowshaper, and then I wrote a book called Half Resurrection Blues, which is an adult book. And then I was like, well, I was trying to get those published, and nobody wanted to buy them. And I was getting rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected. And I always say, I think it's really important to know, like, authors of all stratus, of all like levels, like, get rejected. I still get rejected. It's like an ongoing thing. It's normal. And I want people to know that, because like you can't let it stop you. Shadowshaper, which is my first book that got published finally, that got rejected 40 times. Oh, man. 40. That's the book that like won a bunch of awards, like hit the New York Times bestseller list before my other stuff. Like, that really blew up, but it got rejected 40 times en route. Now, I haven't been rejected that many times since then, but people need to understand that rejection is very much a part of the game. So all that said, while I was getting those 40 rejections, here's the thing that you really should be doing is like writing the next book. Because in fact, a book came out that I was working on in the meantime before Shadowshaper. And that's exactly why you kind of like keep writing and do other stuff. So eventually I was like, okay, I wrote a young adult fantasy. I wrote an adult fantasy. And then I was like, all right, write like a book for younger kids. And I wanted to be like ridiculous, like just weird, and have lots of characters. I just read The Count of Monte Cristo, which is one of my favorite books, Alexander Dumas. And he's amazing. And he wrote the Three Musketeers. And that's a book it's like sprawling. Why? Because he wrote it as it was originally serialized, which means like they would put up parts of it and then they would put up another part of it. So it's a long, wild story, and it's so good. And I was like, I want to do something like that. And I was thinking about New Orleans and how it was affected by Katrina. And I was thinking about Cuba, which is where my family is from. And, how Cuba has been affected by history and colonialism and all these other things. They were all in my mind. And I really wanted to tell a story that had those notions of surviving a flood and fighting off imperial powers and all that stuff going on around it. And that's where this came from. It was really this idea of talking about like, what do young people do when they're put in these impossible situations and they just want to live their lives and make art and play music and have a good time, but there's evil aliens attacking and there's floodwaters rising. And that's very true to like, right now in this moment, obviously, like, like there's a lot of truth in that. But it was also true back then, 11 years ago, with environmental stuff and everything else that's been going on for a long time. So all those things were at play. And then I submitted it and nobody wanted to buy it, like with Shadowshaper. Even though at that point I was like, oh, come on, I got novels out. Like, I have a career going. And they were still like, no, it's not really. No. I was like, so it just took forever. And then I finally sold it to Scholastic. And immediately before it came out, I also sold them Dactyl Hill Squad, my other kids book series. And they were like, this is so cool. We're going to put this out first. And that was a trilogy. So that took another 3 years. And here we are today.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I know it's complicated.
That's amazing though. And I think, rejection is a part of life for anyone. So I think you make a solid point about that. Like, I think it has our respect. I always say rejection always has my respect because it's going to come either in whatever part of life.
Exactly.
But I wanted to talk, so 11 years, did you add anything to it throughout the times it was getting rejected, or like, did you shift anything?
It did change. So at one point, trying to get it published, I actually broke it up into 3 parts because the book itself is broken up into 3 sections, and they are very distinct. And each one really does have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I was like, you know what? Maybe they work better as shorter books, and it's a trilogy. And so I tried that, and everybody rejected it. And then I put it back together as one, and then they were like, "Okay, yeah, that's it." And I was like, like, you can't. Publishing doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Like, it makes sense in it's like it's capitalism, it's marketing, it's all kinds of other stuff, and there's things at play that are so much beyond what one lonely author can know. That you kind of have to just be like, all right, you do your best.
You just keep shooting your shot and seeing who or when. All right. So our second question is, how do you create the visual narratives and characters in your work? Are they a reflection of your surroundings, experience, people, etc.?
Definitely. I think a lot about, I draw a lot from, on the one hand, like I was talking about, current events and also history. I love history. I always have. I love mythology. I always have, and I love how they're interconnected. So to me, it's always like the combination. I always think of it as a crossroads of like the past and the present and the future. And this book specifically is set in the future, in a kind of a mystical future. And it's also about the past, and it's about a lot of different things. I think that's always true on some level of when we're writing, especially when we're creating fantasy worlds. We're always drawing from history, from our own histories. And then, yeah, very much so the people in our lives, the people we know, the people we don't like, like just all kind of people we love, of course, like, and the cities we live in. I live in New Orleans now. I lived in Brooklyn when I was writing the book, and there's certainly a lot of Brooklyn in there too. I'm always writing about community. I think community is it's our superpower, especially as Latinos. It saves us. It's there for us. It protects us, and sometimes it can hurt us too, and that's the hardest thing, right? And I think we're always trying to negotiate, like, who are we in our community, and how will our community have our back or not? And all those questions, I think, are just part of the work. But it's also about being an organizer, which I was doing a lot of at the time, especially when I was writing the book. I was doing organizing work around racism and gender violence and stuff like that. And so I was really engaged with the different ways that we interact with the world and are in conversation with the world. And it's not always in the obvious ways. Like, we think of protest as like, okay, you organize a protest, people go out in the streets, they carry signs, and that's important, and that's a part of it. And I was doing a lot of that, but it's also art. It's also cooking. It's also getting people together and like doing the behind the scenes work and legal strategies. And there's so many things to it. That's why, there's a kid in this book that is a scientist, that loves creatures. There's a kid in this book that is a musician. And there's a girl who's super technology based, and like, so all these different things are part of being a kid, being a human in this world. And sometimes they're also part of survival and fighting the power.
You make a really good point. I really liked how you said that sometimes community hurts us, because I think a few of us, especially folks of color, are learning boundaries with community currently right now in the climate we're in, right? Because I think it resonated with me when you said that, sometimes community hurts us, and you're right. I think, finding boundaries is something that I think a lot of us are working on. So it's
so hard to do. We're not really taught, right? Like, hopefully we are, but it's not like a part of the curriculum. And for me, like, I always think, like, I remember this old man that I met in Baltimore. He was Puerto Rican, and he asked me where I was from, and I was like, I'm Cuban. And he was like, oh, somos dos alas del mismo pájaro, right? We're two wings of the same bird. It's so beautiful. It's like, it struck me. It was so poetic. And this is just like a guy in a street fair, it was like so random. And he just had this beautiful poem to me. And it's true. Like, I think being Latino means you're a part of a bird with many wings. And that's so powerful. And with great power comes great responsibility, right? And like, what does that responsibility mean for a storyteller? It means we have to be, to me, responsibility as a community member, no matter what, it means you have to deal with our crap, like the bad stuff, and we have to deal with it up front. That's taking responsibility. That's dealing with your superpower, is like addressing those really hard to talk about things, including transphobia, anti-Blackness, sexism, like all of those things are problems. And very often we hear about them through a lens of whiteness or folks who are outside of our community telling us that we are these things. And so naturally we buck that, understandably, because there's a lot of racism involved with that. But there's also things we have to do with that are true, with patriarchy, with our legacy, with taking on the stain of colonialism and like, glorifying it, like slavery, like that's all stuff that we have to deal with, and we haven't dealt with it well as a community as a whole up to this point, and we have to.
Yeah, take accountability. So, all right.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. Just listening. Okay. Next question. So, is there someone you think about, or a specific target audience or person when you write certain characters? So, I know we know you write, middle grade YA, adult, like. Some authors write to their like inner high schooler or whatnot. Like, do you ever like have someone at the forefront that you're writing for?
It does change. It depends what I'm writing, for sure. And there is always the little me that I'm writing to when I'm writing for kids, for sure. I was a little, Latino nerd. And I was always looking for myself in books and not finding myself. And like, to me, that's a great, like, it's a human right. Like, to see yourself as a hero in a book, it's a human right. And it's one that like every single person deserves to see themselves in a book as a hero. If we don't have that, like when we're denied that, when publishing or mass media or Hollywood deny us that, it is a denial of our human rights. Because how are we supposed to understand ourselves as heroes if we never see that, if we don't see heroes that, look like us, yes, and like culturally feel resonant to us, if we're constantly translating, that's not fair. That's not right. That's not okay. And I think that's a big fire in my work always is not letting the next generation of kids, of brown kids and Black kids and kids of color in general, like to have to like making it so they don't have to grow up with that dearth of representation that we do, like always looking for ourselves. I think Maria, Sonia Manzano on Sesame Street, like is like the main like Latina like hero that I had, and she's amazing. Like, don't get me wrong, but like like that's it. Like, that was like it's an unfair burden for Miss Manzano to take on. Like, that's a lot of work. And so, I think about like those kids and the fact that they because of my books and a lot of my fellow writers' books, like they won't grow up like desperately looking for that one person out there to hopefully represent them as best as possible. And I think about young people I've worked with. I've done a lot of community work with, teaching and stuff. And I think about those young people, even like, if we were doing this live, which we should be, and which one day we will, just like these one-off events, like I still remember their faces in like different schools that I visited and young people, and they didn't even say anything sometimes, just their expression and the way that they're engaging with the work and the way that they appreciate it and devour it. It's so powerful to me, and I remember them, and I think about them when I write.
That's cool. Yeah. And I also wanted to share. I was just talking with my boss about this, about how reminiscing about how I was young and when I saw myself being represented was like Gary Soto's Too Many Tamales, right? And like that lit me. I still remember that instance in school, and I was like, oh my God, there's people who look like me in books. And so, it is about healing your inner child within literature. And so I'm so glad that we're having more authors of color just sharing their words and expertise and just their experiences growing up. So
absolutely,
we're very thankful. All right. So our next question is, bear with me. It's kind of long because there's some quotes involved. So, all right. So you present the contrast between how to say a word in Spanish versus English during one scene. And it happened very quickly, but it really stayed with me because this is something that I think happens to many of color and or Spanish speaking communities. And the scene goes like this. Hey, what is it? What is a okay, this is where I mess up because I'm both English and Spanish speaker. What is a guerrilla squad anyway? You say it, guerrilla, Otto said, pronouncing the L sound at the end of the Y sound Max had used. Oh, in Flood City, two L's together sound like yeah, well, not in space. And that's on page 206. What made you include this scene, and what is the history behind it? Sorry, I don't know if I messed up guerrilla and guerrilla because I always say guerrilla. Yeah. I was like, I was like, wait, how do you say guerrilla in English, Lear?
That's why I get it. I totally get it. It's
like hilarious. The animal?
I know. It was a moment.
Guerrilla warfare. Yeah, you in English you do pronounce it like So part of it was that I wanted to establish Flood City as like a place that had been very influenced by Latin culture. And that was important to me because that's how I imagined it. And also it's part of the framework of the book is that these folks were left behind and that those dynamics of race are still at play, unfortunately, in the future. That's part of the thesis behind the book. And that they're all, as kids, they're trying to deal with that, just in the way that kids do, like, what does this mean? And they, like Otto comes into that scenario from being in space and being around mostly white people and being like, whoa, like there's so many different kinds of people in the world. And in a way, like very innocently, just realizing, how diverse the world can be, humanity can be. And I think, Max is also just very open-hearted about it. And he's like, he knows what's going on and what the scenario is and why he's stuck in one place and his new friend is not. But he's also sees his friend as a friend and as a human and takes him for that. So I think that's beautiful and challenging. I think they still have to challenge each other, right? And so this was a moment of like cultural smashing together, not in conflict, but just being like, oh, like we have to talk about language and how does it play out, right, in different ways. So on the one hand, it was that kind of talking about those deeper themes. On the other hand, I just wanted people to understand that this is how we're pronouncing this word in this book, and the only way to do it was to have someone mispronounce it and then explain it, you know, because. But it does bring up an interesting point, and it's I have a YouTube video that went sort of viral about this very topic, and it's about the idea of italics, right? And because like it's still in some places, although less so, and I'm gratified to know that less so, in part because of the video. But it's often been common practice to use italics anytime there's a non-English word in a text. So in the old school way of doing things, the word guerrilla would have been italicized, right, in this book. But I never would have stood for that. Why? Because like we don't pause and add extra emphasis on words when we're bilingual. Like that's not, and that's what italics do. Italics indicate emphasis, right? It's a stop. And when you emphasize a word, this is in italics, right? Italics would have been italicized in that sentence. But we don't do that. We don't stop and go, and I'm going over to la biblioteca. Like,
I mean,
how we talk, right? We go, oh, voy a la biblioteca, and then I'll go over to the supermercado. It's like, hey, whatever, you know, it's fast, and that's the beauty of it. That's the poetry of bilingualism, is that it doesn't stop. We don't switch brains. It's literally both. It's one brain, and we are unified in that. That's hard. It's complicated, right? But identity question, it hits the realm of language because, you know, identity says we're this and we're that, right? Like I have Jewish family members and I have Cuban family members. I'm this and I'm that. But no, I'm just this, right? And this encompasses those things, but that's one. I don't italicize half of my identity. Right? And that's, you know, that's the thing about italics. So it feels like a lie, you know, and we can't lie. We got to stop lying to kids.
That's a great point, because whenever I'm reading something that has a different language, like, it makes you stop, pause, and it's like it's screaming at you, but it's not screaming at you. You're just reading it. And I like when there's no italics, so it flows better in my head.
It does. It does.
Yeah. It's a really, that scene, I giggled for a long time because this actually happened to me as an adult, like living up north. I'd say like manteca. No, I said manteca instead of manteca, and people would just be like, no. And I'm like, yes. So like in California, if you're from Northern California, it's called manteca, not manteca. But you read it in, you read it in Spanish, and it was so wild. So this book, it just shows, I think you hit home in the sense that I'm not like, I'm one person. I think we all, you know, 2 languages, how many languages you speak, is just flowing.
Right.
So
exactly.
it was fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed that.
And we were wondering, how much say do you get when choosing the illustrator or how the book cover looks? Not only just for this book, but also Shadowshaper, the trilogy, some of the most beautiful covers I've ever seen. But wondering how much you got to have a say.
A lot. Some of it is luck, and then some of it is hard work. It's both. Like I will say that there's a misunderstanding often that writers are very involved with the cover. Or a question I always love that I get a lot when I do school visits is they go, "How did you draw the cover?" Let me start from the beginning. No. So we usually don't draw our covers. I do love drawing, but I'm not that good. But I have been very fortunate in that all of my publishers have always been extremely forward and forthright about consulting me on every level. So with Shadowshaper, which was again my first book, they actually just nailed it on the first try, and that's so rare. It's amazing when they do that. But they did consult me all along the way. They showed me the different people that they were looking at to be the part of Sierra, and they kind of bounced it off me, and that was really cool. And that's part of why they got it right. Flood City was similar. I keep pointing the wrong way. Flood City was similar. They consulted with me about who the artist would be, and they sent me sketches and they sent me versions. And I remember there was a couple notes I had. I kept trying to be like, more like, you got to get some sci-fi in there, like, because one version of it was just the kids, you know. And I was like, I love it. They look amazing, but we need to see that it's like this sci-fi novel. Like it's like it's when you heard how it starts out. It's like people falling off buildings. And there's iguana goals. That's why there's iguana goals in the cover. They're small, but they're in there. Yeah. I was like, come on. Yeah.
There's like a few. I don't know if you could see it.
Yeah, they're flying around there because there's
I don't think
monsters and space fights and shootouts and stuff. It's a very exciting book. So I wanted that to be clear. So yeah, we had a lot of conversation about it.
Well, is there any specific thing that you had them add on the characters that to make it more sci-fi? Like, I know that they're holding a few things, or
yeah, it was them holding the stuff. I did have to tell them that Max should be bigger. Max is a big kid, and publishing is very not great about putting big kids or fat characters on covers. And it is important to Max's identity that he's fat, and that's fine. And that's a wonderful thing, and that there's no problem with that in his life. And I just wanted that for him. So the original, it's so funny because he looks so much like John Boyega, and he looked even more like John Boyega when they first had him, because he wasn't skinny, but he wasn't big enough. So I had to keep being like, just make him bigger, make him bigger, make him bigger. Come on, you can do it. And
I know, just keep going. He's a
great artist, but yeah, we went back and forth. But that's the process. That's normal. Yeah. It doesn't mean he did it wrong. And that was just a personal thing. Was like, it has to be clear that he's a big kid, because he is.
Oh, that's interesting. That is cool. I don't think I noticed some of the details until now. I always like really having the author really point it out. So, all right. Yeah. So, did you hide any secrets / Easter eggs in your books? Wait, do you hide any secrets / Easter eggs in your books that only a few people will find? And this goes for any of the books. Is there any hidden secrets you want to know? We're big chismosas around here.
Interesting. It's kind of like, if you're really paying attention, you could trace the main characters of this book in lineage to Magdalise and Dactyl Hill Squad.
What? Oh, I'm writing myself a note.
She's like,
potentially, is all I'm saying. So they're sort of connected in the same world, potentially. In Shadowshaper actually has a whole ton of connections. That because it crosses over with my adult series. I have an adult series called The Bone Street Roomba, these books, and they take place in the same world as Shadowshaper. So there's even kind of reference in these books that like the Shadowshaping kids show up and like help fight a battle at one point, and they cross paths. They're all the characters are at a similar event, but they don't know each other, so they cross each other at different moments and stuff like that. So yeah, there's tons of Easter eggs throughout. And then in my Star Wars work, it's all Easter eggs. This series, the High Republic Adventures, is full of Easter eggs. That's all it is.
How fun!
Wait, do you want to share any from Star Wars though? Because I know we have we want at least one. I mean, don't you see my little Millennium Falcon in the back here? So you gotta share one. You gotta share one.
So the Easter eggs in this series all connect to other stuff happening in the High Republic. The High Republic is a brand new publishing initiative that talks about Star Wars, but 200 years before the Skywalker saga. So it's a whole other era of Star Wars we've never explored before. So a lot of the Easter eggs are like touching on different stories that I have in that series, in the other comics and books and stuff, and then some of my co-authors in that. So you have to be a High Republic aficionado to know. But if you are, you'll definitely know. So I would honestly recommend you just read the whole High Republic, everything, because it's all really good stuff.
Cool. All right.
So this next question is very long. Bear with me.
I just like them long questions here.
You can see Otto's growth in understanding how even though he felt trapped growing up in space and experienced his own traumas, he still understood Jenna's anger towards Otto's ancestors and the destruction and the murdering of the people. And you can really see this during one of their conversations. So this is a quote from page 226. What if you had just left us alone? You already destroyed a whole planet. Wasn't that enough? Otto opened his mouth to say that he hadn't personally destroyed anything, but great use of italics. But it just felt like dodging somehow. He hadn't been alive when it happened, but the only reason he was even alive was because his parents had known the floods were coming and left Earth in time to survive. A decision he didn't make, yet benefited from anyway. So you introduced a topic that I think many folks from disadvantaged communities feel when in conversation with those more privileged. Why was including this scene so important, and what are your feelings towards this scene and conversation?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is in the question, isn't it? It's important because you know why it's important. It's important because it's exactly that. Like, it's something a lot of us feel and experience and have lived through and don't see in narratives or don't see it done with any kind of smoothness or nuance in narratives very often. Because nowadays, like, it's sort of become a thing to like try to talk about privilege, but it's done a lot of times like without a lot of analysis, like, or without really caring what it means, just like throwing it in there ham-fisted and being like, hey, privilege, it sucks, or whatever. Like, that's not, that's not a conversation about privilege. That's just saying it sucks, right? Like you can't talk about race and not talk about power. And the conversation they're having is a conversation about race and power. It's the power of survival and of not even having to think about survival, and the power of having like ancestors having done that for you, and then talking to someone who didn't have that power and who barely survived, and who most of their people didn't survive. And that's a conversation that is important because it's a real one. It's one that we are having over and over. We've been having since the dawn of colonialism. And we still don't know how to have it. Like 400 years later, 500 years later, whatever. Folks are still botching it. Why are they botching it? Because it's uncomfortable. Why is it uncomfortable? Because it means we have to deal with our stuff, and that's hard to do. And the people in power are usually the ones that get uncomfortable and so don't have the conversations. It's like, there's nothing more powerful than being a storyteller. Like I said earlier, like that's the responsibility that it entails, and it's not easy. It's not always fun, and especially because what is easy is messing it up and doing it wrong, and that's a very real thing. But we have to try. We have to try to like take the conversation to a better place, a deeper place. I think it's just always important to talk to the people who don't get talked to. Like whether it's in a classroom or in a book, like there's always people that the powers that be ignore and don't feel like their voice matters, or their not just their voice but their ears, right? Like what they're taking in, like they don't feel like that matters because they don't perceive them as having enough of a consumer power base, or maybe they just don't think that their humanity exists, or whatever it is. It's common, and I think it's just always important to start there and then see where you're going. I think this conversation is important for kids who've been on the side of it where, like, where Jenna is, where she's like, y'all messed up. Like, I have no need to forgive you because you didn't have to do any of this stuff and you benefit from it. So you're the ones that should stop it. And that's a real emotion. Like people shove forgiveness down our throats a lot. And I think it's very unhealthy, in part because forgiveness is something that it's a feeling. Like forgiveness isn't a political decision. You don't actually get to decide to forgive people. You can try, you can strive for forgiveness, and that's noble. And I respect that. But like, and we all know this from interpersonal stuff. Like, when someone hurts you, you don't get to just be like, you know what, I forgive you.
I mean, imagine
you can hear the words, like it sounds pretty, and you're noble when you do it. But if you don't actually feel like, if you haven't actually forgiven them in your heart, it's a lie. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like you're just telling them something to look good or whatever. But I think we kind of like botch that conversation about forgiveness a lot because it's so often like, oh, well, these marginalized people forgive the people that hurt them, and it's like, I don't know, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but like it's up to them. It's not up to some newscaster to like make a performance out of it. I don't know. It's just wild to me. So it's that, but then to finish my thought, it's also about the people who've been in that uncomfortable situation of being like, wow, my power is being called out. The very like foundations of my existence, literally, are built on other people struggling and suffering. That doesn't make me a bad person, but it means that I have to deal with that. And it does affect the people around me, including the people that I might love and be in community with. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to deal with it. Far be it for me to be the last person to bring up the fact that that's a truth about me, because that's labor. That's me enforcing labor on somebody else. And that's why we talk about these things.
Yeah. And I think this moment was really not eye-opening. It was very like it took a moment to process what was happening because it happened. And I did get Jenna's feelings where I was angry, right? And you talk about frustration and I think we can talk about privilege the whole hour if we need to, but like not if we could, but I think what we miss is that a lot of us have privilege, right? And I think because it's so intersectional, right? And so we're missing these conversations when we're walking into communities, we forget that we can also have privilege and carry that privilege, right? And how that's affecting, right? And so it was interesting to read this scene and see that see Otto really just step back and take the moment to reflect, right? Because I hardly have seen that happen in my life with individuals having this conversation, right? Where like that internal dialogue was very helpful for me as someone who is angry about what's happened in the past, right? To see someone in a more privileged position say that was actually very heartwarming, if that makes any sense.
Totally does. And that's why it's there. I think it's important to model these things, right? Like, because I think if anyone's going to learn how to figure this whole mess out, it's going to be young people, including privileged ones and non-privileged. And you're right. That's a very simplistic binary. It's not that simple. It's not there's privileged people and there's non-privileged people and they're in these two camps. It's also not everybody, which you're not saying, but there's some people that say, oh, everybody has some privilege and everybody doesn't. So it's a flat circle like time. No, that's not it. That's not how it works.
It's so complicated.
It's so complicated, but power is really at the heart of everything, right? And power is complicated. And like that's why I'm saying like we can't talk about race without talking about power, because if we do, we'll just have a conversation about like people being mean to each other.
I mean, who doesn't love that?
Right. That's the movie Crash. Like we don't need more of that. That won its Oscar. It can go. Right? Like, there's so much deeper a conversation to be had. And my real like final like word on this is that, I mean, we can keep talking about it, but the thing that I keep coming back to is that like this is what makes books better and stories better. Like, and I think people think it's the opposite. Like, oh, the second you bring in like especially power, but any conversation about race or politics, like that's when you're preaching to people and it gets simplistic. No, simplistic is Crash. Simplistic is like just thinking that race is about people being mean to each other. That's simplistic. That's a very basic analysis. It's a bad analysis. It's not smart and it's not helpful. And it doesn't make for good storytelling. Good storytelling talks about the complexities of life, of society, the stuff that we're up against, right? Good storytelling, any storyteller will tell you, is about conflict. And like you can't talk about conflict if you don't talk about power. If you don't have an understanding of power, it might be in a whole other world that you create, but you're still going to be thinking through. That's what makes like Game of Thrones so good, is like there's a power analysis in that story. It's not about race, but there's a whole lot going on in power, and like with power and all that stuff. That makes stories good, not bad.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I know. And you're like, and scene. I'm just kidding. But I think moments like this really stresses how great Flood City was, and how there are moments that took me aside and was like, this is healing a part of me where I grew up and didn't have access to this. So for those folks who haven't, you can get your free copy if you email the email on, well, it's in the comments. But also, if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the comment or chat box. So our next question is, Flood City really reminded me of your other middle grade books, the Dactyl Hill Squad series, an alternative history fantasy that combines the U.S. Civil War in 1863 with dinosaurs. Because both books present environmental issues and issues of colonialism, why is it important to present such tough topics for younger readers? Which I think you kind of hit on, but
I did, and so did you. The question is in the answer. I mean, the answer is but no, that's not fair. I know what you mean. And
he's like, that's it.
It's because it's exactly what we're all going through right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's not even about like me being how do you say that word? Prescient? Having a being able to see the future.
That sounds good.
The future is about me writing in the exact moment that I was living in, which is a continuation of what we're living now. And you know, it's just it's a reality. Like the writer writes to the moment, and that's what's happening. Like we are still dealing with colonialism. We're still dealing with the fallout of the Civil War and the failure to truly win the cultural battle, even when the military battle was over. And you know, that conversation is alive, right? The statues conversation is alive. Like that was all happening while I was writing these books, and that's that's just constantly like what we're dealing with. But like, how are young people supposed to process that if like old people can't process that, right? Old people are like, oh, they were American heroes who were traitors to America and were fighting for slavery. What? Like,
it's a mess.
It's so backwards. Like it doesn't even make sense to say out loud. Like it's absurd, but it's so normalized. We all grew up with those statues all around, with buildings named after these people, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, like and like that was normal. That was okay. That was seeing both sides, right? Like that's not like That's not what it means. So I think we have to sort of like denormalize that conversation around slavery, like around American history, like, and just deal with it for what it is. That's all we're ever asking. And that is literally books, literature, stories, job, is to deal with the world as it is. Like, that doesn't mean every book has to, I'm a fantasy writer, you know, I don't write nonfiction books. Some of my books will take place in an entirely other universe, but I still have a responsibility to deal with the world that I'm writing in, that the books are coming out in, right? That's still a reality, is like this world, the one that the books show up in, because those books affect people, and people are what affect the world. So books do change the world. Stories change the world. But that's not like just a happy-go-lucky, wonderful, you know, thing with lollipops and unicorns that we get to be like, hey, stories change the world, right? That's like, which is like what you hear a lot of people say. That's a talking point, like stories change the world, right? But then when we're like, yes, they also have like taught us that we don't exist, or that we don't matter, or that we can only be bad guys or sidekicks who are about to die so that the hero can have his moment of truth, right?
And that we need saving,
also,
right?
Right. That's also a thing that stories do. And that's a bad thing. That's not good. And that's not good because stories are so powerful. So if we're going to recognize the power of story, we have to honor the fact that stories are powerful in the good way and the bad way. And obviously it's not that simple either, but those are things we have to deal with. And we don't, but we have to. It's our job. We have one job. Deal with
it. I know.
I have over here. It's hilarious.
You're just getting, there's a frog. Awesome.
Yeah.
I really love how your middle grade books, this is just off topic. I really love how your middle grade books, and also middle grade books in general for the past however many years. Now, when I was a kid, not only have kids of color in the forefront and being the heroes, but that they deal with the hard topics, and they deal with things that kids that age are dealing with. And if, you know, other kids are dealing with it in real life, other kids can read about it and therefore find their empathy. And I didn't see a lot of that when I was growing up. So the publishing industry has a far to go, but it's so great to see all the middle grade books, especially, just like burst out.
Yeah, shout out to Clarabelle Ortega's book, Ghost Squad, right behind me. Such a great example of that. Witchling, she has coming out soon. There's so many great ones. Most of the ones behind me are YA, but they're all really great too. Reclaim the Stars is an anthology of Latino writing, YA sci-fi writing that Zoraida Cordova edited, that I have a story in that's coming out in February, I think. And there's just so much great work coming.
Yeah. I'm super excited for Reclaim the Stars. So I want to give a shout out to Nancy Barahona, because we have the same question. Any plans for Flood City Part 2?
Yes and no at the same time. I'll try to explain myself. In my head, it's absolutely a bigger world. Here's the good answer to that. Well, no, there's two. There's the good and the bad. The bad is it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. As a book.
Like, oh my God.
I know, sorry.
You broke my heart real from the start.
I have the beginning of the story in my head, and it might happen. It's just probably not going to happen anytime soon. Why? Because right now, just my book schedule is full of other stuff. So I don't know when I'm going to write it. I don't have any plans to write it in the future. However, what is really cool, and what ties into what we were just talking about, is that my story in Reclaim the Stars is a prequel to Flood City.
Oh.
It is in fact about, so if you read it, that's the Easter egg that you were asking for. If you read it and you have read Flood City, you will find characters that you have heard of or met, but in a totally different form, because it takes place during the floods.
Ooh.
That is a good Easter egg hunt. I mean, Easter egg hunt, Easter egg, whatever.
I really love the story. I'm really, really proud of it. And it's different, but it's connected to Flood City. So there you go. There's your sequel. It's a prequel.
That is really cool. I think the beginning just started so, it bang. And then I was interested in seeing like how did it get here, right? And the history behind that and the division, right? And like so I am really that warmed my heart. I won't be so like sad anymore. All right. So I'm going to rephrase this question a little bit so we don't. But okay, so we noticed and we talked a little bit about this already about how it's crucial for young people to be represented in literature. And so why is it important for you to do this? And you do this often in a lot of your work, as we see, not only in the covers throughout your work, but why can you elaborate a little bit more about why it's your mission to do this and why others should do it, and all that good jazz?
I mean, I think it comes back to the truth. It's just about telling the truth. It's like what I was saying earlier. Like, we have one job as storytellers. Our job is to tell the truth. We can do it sideways. We can do it with dragons. We can do it backwards. But we still have to tell. There still has to be some truth in there. And sometimes that's emotional truth. But ultimately, I think that the harder truths to get at, and therefore the good ones, are those difficult ones that are like, how do we talk about this thing? And that's the sweet spot. Like, that's what we're here to do, is like try to tell stories that talk about truths that are difficult to deal with and to think about, and we don't have a language for. I think we're always creating new languages as the world changes, and young people, not for nothing, are the best at that. Like, young people are always at the absolute vanguard of language. Most of the slang that we have today is because of young people, and they came up with it, and they made it big, and they made it matter. And then old people are like, "Oh, that's pretty cool. That's snazzy." But like, the reality is, like, we really we need to look to them because they know what's going on. They treat language as it should be treated, which is as something fluid. That's how Shakespeare treated language. Shakespeare invented more words than any other writer, and words that we now consider just absolutely normal and part of the canon of English. But he made them up. He pulled them out of wherever. And, that's what young people do. And young people, in that sense, are like Shakespeare. And the reason that new language matters is because our reality keeps changing, particularly now on a day-to-day basis. But also because, as people come into themselves and figure out who they are, as people tear down old power structures that were irrelevant to begin with and are especially irrelevant now, as people buck their bad habits of our parents and of us, like, those are all things that are constantly happening. The world is made out of change. The world is water, and we have to accept that. And language is at its best when it moves with the world instead of against it. That's why I don't really care what you call us. As far as like people, it's not for me to decide what you call us or yourselves. What I do notice is like the vehement opposition to people saying Latinx is so intense, and same thing with people being mad about they them pronouns or the singular they them. Like, both of those things are totally normal. Like, language is always changing; it is always fluid, and they them has been used since before Shakespeare as a singular. But they always say, "Oh, this is new. Why are you changing language? Why are you making up words?" I would like to know the word that's not made up. Like, please, by all means, tell me that word. What word grew on a tree that you picked from the nature of the
I know, that was real. Well, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's wild to me when old, you hear folks. I don't want to just say older folks, but like just folks being like, our younger generation is killing our language, right? I've been told that, like, especially with the term Latinx or Spanglish happening. I walk into rooms and I'm like proud to be a pocha, but it took a while to get to that, right? Like, I mean, right. I can speak English and Spanish very well, but there are moments where I'm just like, I can barely speak English correctly, right? And so I think you bring.
You know what bothers me about that especially is like, Spanish is a colonizer language. Like it's not in danger of dying. It's not. And I know, like, people in the United States, for us, a lot of us, it's a language of resistance because English is so dominant and because there's, so much anti-Latino sentiment. And yes, so there's some form of it. I know, like, for me, like, I had to understand Spanish as like a language of my family, and that was important to reclaim it and everything. But at the end of the day, there are actual indigenous languages that are actually dead because of the Spanish people who came and killed them. Like, that's not like a controversial opinion. That's what happened. Mm-hmm. And those languages are gone. And people are trying to actually, like, bring them back to life through very painstaking work because everyone who spoke them was murdered.
Yeah.
By Spanish-speaking people. And like, again, let's deal with history. Like, that doesn't mean all Spanish-speaking people are bad. It means that we have to understand. It means we can't be like so reckless with words like, you're killing our language. Our language is in danger. It's not. Spanish isn't going anywhere. The Academia Real, and all that other nonsense. But making rules, even if did they abolish themselves, whatever, there's still going to be a bunch of old people making rules about language for time.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's it. Like, it sucks. Like, it doesn't suck that Spanish isn't going anywhere. That's good. But language you don't get to like make rules from on high with language. Language will always keep transforming. So you can be mad about it, or you can deal with it and be in conversation with it. Again, I'm not saying you have to use Latinx. Like, that's not my argument. I don't care what you use. I'm not arguing that it's the most popular thing in the world. It's not. Whatever. But don't come to like, hate speeching people for just if that's what they want to use.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important, right? It's like individualistically, this is how I like address myself, right? And I think that's where it happens, where people just take like it personal, right? Where it comes with the Latinx, where it's like, well, I'm not calling you. If you could choose to name yourself however you want to name yourself,
exactly.
Right? So that's where the convo where you're blaming young people is wild to me. I'm like, hello? First of all, like,
do you speak like Castilian Cervantes Spanish? No, you do not. You do not, because that's not how this works. It changes. Also, do you go to Publix? Can you say Publix? Then you can say Latinx. Everybody say Publix.
I mean, well, yeah, I mean, you're having us, all these wild, I mean, even like Game of Thrones names, right? Like, or these wild like things. It's like, if you can pronounce this person's name, you can pronounce a Spanish name or a Black person's name, or whatever other name. It's about practicing. But I also, because I am a Star Wars fan, I also wanted to touch on how you incredibly diversify the world too, right? And that was also a whole controversial thing in the beginning when it started happening. But I wanted to see if you can also connect this question to that in that part of your work.
Yeah, the galaxy far, far away is still talking about this world, right? Like there's still humans in that world, and so it's like, of course, there's going to be representation. Like, it only makes sense. But again, it's about telling the truth, So it's like, people are like, why are there, characters of color in Star Wars? And it's like, because there's characters of color here. Like, why are there white people in Star Wars? That's really the question we want to ask, I think. Like, like, that's not a problem. I'm just saying, like, if you have a problem with people of color being there, there's no logic in it. But hate doesn't have logic. Hate is fear, and it's people being like, I thought I was the one and only, right? Like, okay,
isn't that wild?
Yes, it's very absurd, but it's absurd. And so, like, people get mad when they see people who aren't them. What kills me is it's always the people that, like, you'll be like, representation matters. And they'll be like, why does it matter so much that you see yourself? And you'll be like, well, clearly you've never not seen yourself. So you actually know what it's like. And then you show, and then you have a Star Wars movie that is mostly people of color. And it's like, well, representation matters. I can't believe I'm not in that movie. And it's like,
you're like, now you get it.
Everything else.
We just had this conversation. I guess representation does matter after all. That's fantastic. I'm glad we can all agree that representation matters. Look, I think all people should be in Star Wars. But I definitely think that, like, the people who haven't been in Star Wars all this time deserve some shine. And that's what I do.
Well, yeah, because there's fans of all different colors and shades and races and backgrounds. I'm like, so yes, I'm glad. That's why I wanted. All right, am I the one who's gonna answer? No, you. It's you.
We
got caught up.
Do you hear from your readers much, and what are some questions or comments that you've enjoyed getting? So, do they usually talk to you through social media, old school email? Like, how do they contact you?
Typewriting?
Typewriters.
Is email old school now?
No, I don't think so. I use it. I'm old though.
Typewriters are old school, yes. I haven't gotten a handwritten letter, and that's fine, because that would mean that they have my address. And they don't.
That would be weird.
Well, the Star Wars fandom is very amazing online, on social media, and that's been really cool. It's just like interacting with folks, particularly the High Republic fandom has just been so cool and, like, open and interesting. And, like, it's to me, it's just amazing to see, like, the memes and the fan art. Like, that's so to know that, like, the work that we've done has spawned more work. Like that creativity begets more creativity, and like, and memes are very creative. Like, let's not go run past that. Like, it's incredible, and the work that people have been doing, whether it's cosplaying or just like skits, like that's so validating and wonderful to see. So that, and just like the dialogue too, like the conversations, like we put a lot of thought into everything we do, and certainly in Star Wars, like there's so much to be in conversation with in the world. And let's not make any mistakes. Star Wars has always been political. First of all, it's called Star Wars. What is war if not politics, with guns, right? Like someone was like, if you take the politics out of Star Wars, you just have Star, and that's it, right? Like that's it. Like literally, like the first moment of the entire Skywalker saga is about a trade referendum. Like that's what is more political than that? So anyway, there's always these great conversations to be had. It's so cool to just see the fandom like come together and just have these great, really interesting conversations about all this stuff. So that I love, and I just love people who read, Shadowshaper or Dactyl Hill or Flood City, and they're like, wow, I saw myself in this book. Like I found home in the pages of a book about a fantasy world or a magic that isn't real to me, but now it's real. Like seeing themselves in the book is really like, to come back to my origin story is like, that's so validating and gratifying, because I didn't have that, and most of us didn't have that. So to be like, wow, this is another world that we've helped build for young people, for the next generation. That's why we're here. That's what we do.
That's amazing. And I think the forums that live online are always so interesting, and I'm glad, like, good to know that you read them and seek them out, because I think as fans, I think it's incredible to see that you read them. All right, so where am I? Question 12. I think you touched about this a little bit, but have you faced any pushback or criticism about your work, and how do you respond or deal with them? I know. I mean, you kind of said something. But
I write for Star Wars.
Only for Star Wars?
No. Well, that's a particular like flashpoint in the culture wars that it's been documented, even was like strategically picked on as like a spot that like people were going to really jump onto, and you've seen certain media sites like really aggravate that situation very intentionally. So yeah, there's a certain degree of just like extra attention on, first of all, just by being such a huge franchise, and second of all, because like that was targeted in very intentional ways to like, particular movies, and just, it's really ugly. Fortunately, my block and mute hand is strong, and I pretty much just keep it moving. There's a younger version of me that would just engage and like
read the comments.
Read the comments, and like, my zinger hand used to be stronger than my block hand. But as I have matured in life, and look, I don't disrespect people that want to get into it with folks. Like that's their decision. I don't. Yes, that's fine.
That takes the power.
I just don't have it in me anymore. It's more fun to watch them just be mad at silence. You know what I mean? Like, for me, I not watch them at all. Even better. Like just go about my business.
And you have things to do.
Right? I'm busy, right? I really am busy, and I have books to write in Star Wars books to write, and so it's like I could
just
argue
to make them angrier.
Right. Like, well, like why? Just why waste my time arguing with a random guy with 16 numbers after his name on Twitter and an anime avatar? Like, that's no offense to anime avatars. I love anime, but I don't know you. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know you. I don't know who you are, and that's fine. But why am I engaging with you? And there's like really positive people. And let me also say, this isn't about agreements or not. I really love a good disagreement with people who are really entering into it in good faith and like having a good conversation about it. I love that. Like, I think that's amazing. And I always like try to uplift that, whether it's in the fandom or whatever. That's what makes community work.
Yeah.
But it's when it's done with like, love and compassion. It doesn't mean being nice to people, even, because sometimes it can get difficult and messy. But that's very different than like attacking and being racist and all these other things. Those are totally different things. Sometimes they look alike, and people like to confuse them to make themselves feel better, but they are very different things. And I think that's important to know. So yeah, there's always pushback, and there's been pushback since the beginning of my writing career, against my very first book, which came out from a small press, and, not that many people read, and there were still racists that were mad about it. And that taught me a valuable lesson. Like, racists are gonna be mad. Like, they're gonna be mad. Like, they're mad that like this world is the way it is, and that I exist and write books, and that I write books about things that I know to be true, they're going to be mad. Like, I can't make them happy, and I don't intend to try. It's never been my job to try to make them happy. And so if they're mad, I'm going to just use it to sell more books. Like, what I tend to do is screen grab their racist comments and post them on Twitter with a link of where to buy my book. And then people buy my book because they're like, wow, if racists hate this book, it's probably good. And it is.
Yeah. That makes a solid point. I like it. I like, you take a moment to self-promote and like make something positive out of a negative.
If you're going to try to ruin my day, I'm going to get some sales out.
Exactly. And, make people feel seen through your work who are probably missing it. So I like it.
Thank you. Right. So Rosalba asks, I'm going to combo some questions together. So Rosalba asks, what book or story changed your world? And then I'm going to tack on, what's your next project? Can you share a little bit with us?
Sure. The book or story that changed my world, obviously there's so many, and it's ongoing. Like books still and stories still change my world constantly. Even the books behind me by newer writers are so good and powerful and have changed the world, and have certainly changed my world. And I'm so grateful for them. Oh, Tristan Strong is another middle grade. That's great, by Kwame Mbalia. But yeah, those books are so great. I love reading them and just being like, wow, we're all doing this together. There's a real movement and there's a real community of writers right now just doing work that I admire and respect, both for their ability to tell the truth and to tell really great stories, first and foremost, which is always our one job as writers too. So that, but for me personally, in terms of my origin story, I always think about Mrs. Inez Middleton, my 7th grade English teacher, who took me aside and very randomly gave me an Octavia Butler book. And mind you, at this moment, what's 7th grade, 12, 13? Is that right? Yeah. I had no idea I wanted to be a writer. I certainly didn't know that I would want to write in the legacy of, Octavia Butler, which is really what I ended up doing. If you read Shadowshaper, you know that they go to Octavia Butler High School because she was so formative to me as an inspiration. Which is why it makes it so extra magical. She put this book, Blood Child, which is a collection of her short stories, and I still have it right here on the bookcase. She gave it to me and was just like, read this book. And I was like, okay, cool. Blew my mind. I didn't understand any of it. It was way over my head. But sometimes, that's good. It's good when kids read stuff over our heads. It totally blew my mind, but I had no idea what to do with it. It was literally 10 years later that I was like, wait.
You're like, aha.
Yeah, totally. It was like a time bomb, and that's the power of teachers. I was thinking, it's like that story. There's an old Jewish story about a rabbi who would plant trees, and the kids would be like, why are you planting those trees? You're going to be dead by the time they grow. No offense. And the rabbi was like, no, I'm doing it for you, right? And that's so beautiful, and that's teaching. You don't get to see those kids grow up all the time. You don't get to see the fruit of your labor. But you do know in your heart that things are happening. Mrs. Middleton died, before I got a chance to be like, you changed my life, but she knew. Yeah. So, yeah.
Wow. The power of teachers. I think we all have those few nuggets of amazing teachers that just, those moments. All right, Daniel. I know we are beyond the 1 hour, so we are done with our questions. We are so excited that we got to talk to you. And everyone, if you haven't emailed them, please email them. They'll put up the email in a bit to get your copy of Flood City. All right, thank you, Daniel. We appreciate you so much. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with author Daniel José Older. Remember to visit lapl.org to read more books by Daniel. Please join us for our January Your Author program on Friday, January 14th at 4 p.m. with Jennifer E. Smith and illustrator Leo Espinosa. They will be sharing their latest book, The Creature of Habit. Copies of the book will be available as an opportunity drawing as well. Finally, join the Winter Reading Challenge and let a book charm, intrigue, or transport you. Register and track your progress online or on the Beanstack Tracker app, or pick up a game board at any Los Angeles Public Library location, along with a book for kids and teens, while supplies last. Complete 5 activities and entered into an opportunity drawing to win a prize from the library store. This reading challenge goes until January 8th, so you got a few weeks, and I know a few of you are on winter break soon, so what better time, right, Lear? All
yes.
right, so thank you everyone for joining us and attending your author program. We can't wait to see you all very soon. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.